Hey, welcome to the Articulate Ox podcast. This is your host, Soma79. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the first episode, and I'm super excited to share this with you. So what is the Articulate Ox podcast? It is a weekly video podcast. It'll be hosted by myself, artist, writer, filmmaker, Soma79. And I will be talking to different creative types and artists about their creative journey. I've asked each guest to choose a topic, something that inspired them when they were just getting started, like maybe a film that made them want to be a filmmaker, or maybe an album that made them want to be a rapper or a singer, or something like that. And then I interview that guest about that topic, and then about their own artistic journey and their own art, what they're working on, and then anything else that comes up. So the great thing about talking about inspiration is that everybody has a different path. Everybody's journey is unique, and everybody's journey is usually pretty interesting, a lot more so than they probably would think when you ask them. I've had a few guests on who thought, oh, I don't know that I have anything to talk about. And then when we got on, we realized there was a lot to talk about. The person I'm talking to today is my great friend, John Orquiola, who is a senior features editor for Screen Rant. He's written over 2,800 articles for Screen Rant, which is just unfathomable when I actually think about it. But he covers, in particular, he covers topics like Star Trek, Cobra Kai, and over the last few years, he's been forming a relationship with AEW, which is All Elite Wrestling, which, if you're not in the know on that, is kind of the hot wrestling company right now. John is a huge wrestling fan, as I have been over different points of my life. Particularly now, I'm into it now, so this is a great time to have this conversation. The topic he chose was 80s pro wrestling. In particular, the Clash of the Champions, like the matches where Ric Flair faced Ricky Steamboat, that awesome trilogy, Saturday Night's Main Event, which is something that I watched as a kid and inspired the hell out of me for a lot of different reasons. And, we're going to get into all that in the episode. So John's a great guy. He's inspired me a lot personally over the years because, I've known him for quite a long time. He's been somebody like me that had never kind of gave up on pursuing your artistic goals, whether it was for an audience of one or an audience of thousands. It was always that the effort of doing it was always just very central to us as people. And I always looked to him as somebody who he kept chugging away, so I kept chugging away. And it helped me make progress a lot just by having somebody like him to inspire me in my life. Because a lot of people I know, they decided they had these goals they wanted to do, and they sort of just gave up very easily. So when you find the friends in your life who don't give up, it rubs off on you, and it's great. John's a great guy. He's a great friend. He's a great writer. He's funny. He's insightful. And I was so happy to have this conversation with him. So check it out. If you're not into pro wrestling, next week, we'll be talking about something else. Though I should warn you, for some reason or another, pro wrestling does seem to come up a lot on this podcast. I think in the first 12 interviews I did, it's come up maybe about 6 or 7 of them, sometimes only for about 30 seconds or so. But I just find it funny how often it goes back to that. So it seems fitting that John is our first guest and the topic is 80s pro wrestling. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the interview. And if you do, subscribe to my channel on YouTube at Soma79. All right. This is the first episode of the Articulate podcast with Soma79. I'm here with John Orquiola, who I have known for quite a long time. John, writer, I think founder of Back of the Head. It was his own website for years doing movie reviews, and he parlayed that into an awesome gig at Screen Rant, where he's covering, among other things, AEW wrestling, which is awesome. I saw some pictures of John at Comic-Con earlier this summer in San Diego with the likes of CM Punk, and it was Orange Cassidy, Britt Baker, Darby Allin, the who's who. I have so many questions about that, man. That's, as someone who's known you for a long time, we've talked about wrestling for a long time. We watched a lot of some great and bad wrestling together for years. This is very exciting. So you wanted to talk about pro wrestling. The idea here is to talk about talk to creative people about what it is that gave them the inspiration. So in your case, you chose pro wrestling, and we have some crossover here. So John, welcome. I'm gonna stop rambling. How you doing? Introduce yourself.
I'm great. I'm great, Tim. I'm great. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I think you and I actually became friends, I think, because of wrestling in a way. You and I met back at BU. Yep. I think we were making a film with Alex Merkin. It may have been the Aftershock, but I vividly remember visiting your dorm room for the first time. I think we were picking up some equipment or something, or picking you up along with it. And I remember looking at your walls, and there was pictures of the Hardy Boys. And I was like, this is a guy who speaks my language. And and that's how I think that's how we started talking. At least that's my recollection of it.
Which is funny because I hadn't watched. So I watched wrestling when I was a kid, but I hadn't watched it until right around that same time. I moved in with somebody who had like a black box, and I was like, Vince McMahon isn't an announcer; he owns it. Like that was like the year, like maybe 1999 was when I started watching again, and my roommate was super passionate about it, and so he was the same kid I watched with as a kid, so he was filling me in. But yeah, so I was like, this stuff's awesome.
Yeah,
I probably was happy to have somebody to have questions to, because like you knew what you were talking about, and I was like, fill me in the last like decade.
And that was the era also when I think a lot of us who were fans in the 80s and early 90s were suddenly like being introduced to all these all these truths.
Are fine.
Okay, cool. All these truths about wrestling that we never realized as kids. Like Vince McMahon was actually the owner of the company, and and hey, we always kind of knew it wasn't real, but now like we began to understand like just what went into it as a show, and
Right.
the performance aspect of it, and the fact it was it was written by a guy named Vince Russo at the time, and like there are all these elements to it that were just we were being bombarded with as the internet was this nascent thing that was growing, and wrestling fandom kind of grew along with it, and we kind of became smart. I think that was the term. We all became smart marks. And then that's a lot of the conversation about pro wrestling at that time wasn't just about the storylines, but also about the backstage stuff that went along with it. And that's kind of what made it interesting.
Yeah. And for me, it was really wrestling and Kevin Smith that got me on the internet. Like I'd been on it before, but those were the things that got me to keep coming back to the internet, because it was giving me that I was trying to find like Eminem freestyles, but it was like those three things that I was like, oh, this is like why the internet's awesome. Like, which sounds so crazy to say now, but like, it's just it's wild. So one thing you touched on there is the old idea about wrestling not being real, and I was thinking about, I have a very vivid memory of the first time that I was approached with that reality. I remember I was going to soccer practice, and I was talking to soccer. I was like a little kid. I was like maybe like first, second grade, and I just barely even familiar with it. And like I was talking to one of the other kids about how great it was, and the coach was like, that's fake. And my thought was like, what is it like? Are they made of rubber? Are they just like really? What I went to was, oh, they're not actually human beings that I'm watching, because it's like, how can it be fake? They're obviously clearly there doing things, and it's like, So I always knew it was fake, but like I never had a conversation with an adult about it until like I was one. So like I never really knew how it was fake. So like and even fake choreographed, whatever you don't want to call it. It's the word that's obviously
predetermined. I think the word is predetermined.
Yes. Yeah. So how was your introduction to that concept?
I remember being a kid, when I was a kid and when I was first into wrestling in the 80s, late 80s, I read every wrestling magazine I could find. I had stacks of them, Pro Wrestling Illustrated,
the Aftermags.
The Aftermags, exactly, the Bill Aftermags. And so I remember there was a story in there about the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and they got pulled over and they were arrested for smoking marijuana in a car. And the marijuana stuff didn't factor into my mindset at all. What I couldn't understand was what they were doing in a car together when they were blood enemies.
Yeah, like, I know.
How could they be traveling together?
This could have been an international like affair. This could have been like,
you're right. Like, right. These two guys.
The UN should have been there to regulate it.
So like, what were they doing in a car? Like, what happened? Like, did somebody like get stranded and like, he hitchhiked? Like, I ran through every ridiculous scenario in my head for how that could be.
Was the Iron Sheik in the trunk and handcuffs?
Yeah, right. Yeah, as opposed to the obvious thing was like, oh, wait a minute, that they're actually performers, and and it's not what's on TV is not real. Instead, I did every mental gymnastic you could think of to justify this in my head. And then, and I think it was later on, a few years later in the early 90s, when Vince McMahon, I remember this too, because it was in one of the Aftermags, Vince McMahon went to Memphis to Jerry the King Lawler's promotion, Mid-South, and he appeared as the prototype version of Mr. McMahon. He actually did this one show. Yeah, he went to Memphis and played the evil version of himself for the first time as the owner of the WWF. And I was like, the owner of the WWF? Like, he's just an announcer.
Yeah, it depends on the geek. Like,
right.
What a maneuver.
Yeah, and then as the 90s progressed, you began to, as the internet started becoming a thing and we started getting backstage info, I don't remember the exact moment the switch clicked when I realized that, it was all predetermined, but it was a gradual process from there. But those were the two main instances when the fantasy of it all broke for me, and I began to see that that there was something more to this than just what was on TV and what we were presented with.
I think
which
for
was a
me,
show.
the moment when I really understood how it worked is when someone but they actually get hurt. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, and I don't know why that's what it was. I was like, oh, so they just put up with it and they just do their best is essentially was like, okay. And sometimes like, someone's best and it's like, that's sort of what gets interesting about it. Because that whole idea of like there's some things on WWE and WWF and WWF that I've watched that I'm like, they're indefensible. It's like at a time when it's something on the TV and I do not want a girlfriend walking in the room at that moment because I have nothing to say other than let's look at what you watch. Maybe we'll find some sort of equivalent or something. And it's like, but there are other moments that are just so beautiful and just so like, I mean, when I put on, I mentioned to you before we started recording, I have on now a Saturday Night's Main Event in the background on Peacock, which is a wonderful resource, though it is very poorly laid out.
Yes.
I'm watching in the background here. I'm watching actually the Zika eating the head off a chicken with Mr. Fuji. And there's some stuff here from a racial perspective, and there isn't wonderful, but it is reminding me that, like, with the colored backgrounds of like the logos they would do and how much that captured my imagination and the Ultimate Warrior. And for me, it was really
I like what I have right now.
Yep, perfect. Yep, exactly. Like you could cut a promo on me right now. And I remember it was really, I had such a bad taste in wrestlers. My favorite three as a kid were based on this early era. One of them is the TV right now, and that's the Hulkster. Then
I was a Hulkamaniac.
Then I love Whiz Buddy, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, and I love the Honky Tonk Man. And those
I love the Honky Tonk Man too.
He's pretty great, especially having just watched that match. And with Jimmy Hart there, who was really involved in that match. Somebody really should have done something. But I was just like, man, I love it. And I love how still to this day, he's still out there doing his thing. But so who were the guys that really grabbed your attention that really, you attached to?
I mean, I was a Hulkamaniac. So Hogan was my first love. And I stayed a Hulkamaniac pretty much until he left. Well, before he left WWF the first time in '93. As you get older, you become a teenager, you begin to tire of the whole red and yellow wave the flag act. But
that rap album
in the '80s, but in the '80s, I loved Hogan. I loved Savage and Liz. Savage was incredible. I love the Honky Tonk Man just for, every time he told you he was the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, I have no reason to doubt this. I believed him.
Especially when I said that was my introduction. That was he cuts a promo at the very beginning of that, and I was like, okay, this is where we're starting. He's the best. And like that was the information. That was the first information I had about wrestling. Was okay, Honky Tonk Man, you're the best. Got it.
Yeah. And I was, and he was always very clear about who he was. He sang, he danced, and he played the guitar. And it's like, I don't doubt this. Like he clearly does all three. He has a pink Cadillac. He has Peggy Sue. He has all the things.
Driving it. It's like, and I didn't realize Peggy Sue was Sherry Martel, right?
Yeah, Sensational Sherry. Yeah.
Yeah. That's nuts.
And then, but on the NWA side, when I started reading the after mags, I found out there was a whole other company out there, another world champion, a whole different thing, the NWA. I sought it out, and back in Boston, back in the late '80s, I think the NWA was on like 11 p.m. on a Saturday night or something, or midnight on Saturday.
Well, what station would have that been on? Because I'll just give you my
channel 56, or 38, either 38 or 56. It was one of those two.
My only knowledge of that stuff was going into a store and seeing the cover of the after mags, the PW Inside, or not PW, the PW Illustrated, and seeing like maybe a bloody Ric Flair and going, what? I didn't understand it. And that to me would reinforce the idea it was real. I'm like, this guy's bleeding his ass off. Like this has to be real. And like, but I was like, I never saw those dudes. And like, I didn't stick around long enough to see some of them really come in. I don't even think I saw the Flair Rumble. I think I was really only in for like 3 or 4 years as a kid. And so like, the idea of anybody up here even getting it, I think you're a couple years older than me, so I would have been like maybe like 10. You would have been maybe like 13 or something. So you probably
right. Yeah, so that's about right.
Yeah. So you were watching this on like channel 56 or VPN, because I didn't have cable either. I didn't have cable until when we met. When we met in 1999, that was the first time in my life I had cable.
Wow. Yeah. So I did watch that stuff like late night, and then. They used to do pay-per-views back then too. Like they had their own they had Starrcade, they had the Bunkhouse Stampede, they had Clash of the Champions on TBS. When I got cable in '89, I was able to watch that stuff, watch WCW Saturday Night, or back then it was just called World Championship Wrestling on TBS.
My town didn't even have cable in '89. You couldn't get cable in my town in '89.
Wow. So Ric Flair, the Road Warriors, the Midnight
Ooh.
Express, the Four Horsemen. I fell in love with all that stuff. Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, Ronnie Garvin. I watched all those things. So I had, I had the comparison of the WWF, which was still to me the better, not the better show, but the more flamboyant, the bigger show.
Yeah.
And then, but the actual, in terms of quality wrestling, the better in-ring product, the NWA was worlds ahead of them.
And that's something that's interesting too. That might have been the few years difference in us. The idea of one wrestler being a better in-ring performer than the other was not in my consciousness until I would say maybe Kurt Angle almost came in, I would say, or maybe maybe when someone was explaining to me why The Rock wasn't, why despite how popular The Rock was, why he wasn't like really the best. That was, I think, the first time I understood that. So you understood that as a kid, huh? And like, so that did you attribute it to them just being more athletic? I mean, because I guess you're understanding that it's fake.
It's not so much athleticism. I wasn't looking at it like that. I felt like the two companies obviously had different styles to them. Where Vince's show, the WWF, was more of a variety show. They used to call it, in the aftermath, they called it the WWF circus, where it was like it was a 3-ring circus where you had.
It was almost like the Muppets to some degree. At some points, it felt very Muppet-like.
Right. Yeah,
which is not a complaint. I love the Muppets. I think they're magical. They're brilliant. Yeah.
Same here. I didn't have a problem with that. You had Hogan on top, and he wrestled a monster, and the monster would beat him up for a while. Then he'd hulk up and he'd win. So it was like a comic book. And then the Intercontinental title was like the term for me didn't exist yet, the workers title, but that was the action title. That was the one where, Savage, Steamboat, the Ultimate Warrior, I guess, even though he's more of a Hogan type, but that was
stepping stone.
The championship the championship that was, more athletically based. And then the tag team titles were the British Bulldogs, Demolition, the Hart Foundation, which is again pure action, the Rockers.
Right. Loved all that stuff. Yeah,
it was great. Tag team wrestling in the 80s and 90s was incredible. Like now it's AEW has it, but not in the WWF. It's in WWE. It's still largely missing.
It's a work in progress. I to give Triple H just some I don't know. He's done a good job of improving things a little bit, so let's hope it's a work in progress. It's funny too because I was remembering that it wasn't this episode that I'm watching now, but there's one coming up where the Bulldogs, I think, dropped the titles to the Hart Foundation in like a really quick match, and it was almost like an afterthought. And now going back, I remember I know I've read Dynamite Kid's book, which is a little crazy read. I mean, that's but and I understand he was in very bad shape physically, and Andre was in very bad shape, pretty much the entire time we probably saw him on television. We never saw his best work.
He was a shell of himself.
Yeah, looking back on it now and understanding what was happening with the individuals in that is really very interesting. It's pretty wild to think about, and just knowing what we know about Hogan, how it's just Hogan's had his good days and had his bad days. Like, and just we could talk for hours about Hulk Hogan, but it's funny too. This is something that I don't know. This occurred to me when I was watching this morning. You really, in preparation for this, you recommended that I watch the trilogy, the Clash of the Champions. I mean, the Steamboat versus Flair. And I not only watched those matches, but I watched the entire shows because there's a lot of people on there that I'd never really seen before, and there was people I'd heard of, but like, and didn't really now have a better context for, and they weren't just jobbers. And it's like and it left me wondering, what's the better weapon, a tennis racket or a Zach Morris cell phone? Who knows? Like, they both seem wonderful.
I was more partial to the tennis racket. I was always partial to the tennis racket. I don't know why.
And I just though the Samoan SWAT team or whatever, I was like, why was this not on my television? This is pretty wild. Like, I was loving it.
What was it? That was Sabu and Fatu, right?
I think, I think so. I was watching it on the elliptical without my glasses on, so I'm like, I need to do some Googling to really figure out.
Fatu was Rikishi. Or he became Rikishi.
I didn't even realize that. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I gotta, I don't have my glasses on.
And he's the father of the Usos. Yeah, so that connects all together. It really is a dynasty.
Yeah, I know. Dynasty. I mean, like, the one thing that wrestling taught me more than anything is you do not fuck with a Samoan. Like, that is one thing that, like, that's probably one of the biggest take homes, and I will not. The one thing. So this is one thing I was thinking, that as I was watching Steamboat come to the ring, looking like he just came from like a church picnic, like, and like, I mean, and then like I'm just like, this looks like literally he come from a church picnic, and here's just something he was doing on the way home because like the arena was nearby. And then he's got his kid there, which for anybody who hasn't seen it, he's got his kid dressed up like a little dragon. This is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. His wife is there with him. They are pitching him as the family man of all family men, which he was. Like, that's my understanding of it. That was the man that he was. A man whose real last name was Blood and didn't use it because nobody ever believed, because that's kind of a bad guy name and no one would view him as a bad guy.
Exactly.
And then you have Flair come in one of the matches with like 40 women. And it's just like, wooing his way and just being the Ric Flair that we all know. And it made me, and then when Ricky Steamboat gets in the ring, he really just turns it on. He turns into a wrestling machine. And this is a weird comparison, but it got me thinking that this is a little like Orange Cassidy. Whereas like there was such like he just like is this dude back? He's doing these interviews that he just, and then like when he gets in the ring, though, I know he does a little shenanigans with the pocket and stuff like that, but he's like a legit wrestler. And it's like not that it's similar in like directly, but it's the degree in personality switch that you see when the bell rings is very similar in a way. And I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. Like I don't know, any thoughts on any of this stuff? Like I don't know, I've rambled. What do you think?
That's actually an interesting point. I never even considered like the diametric link between somebody like Steamboat and somebody like Orange Cassidy. Yeah, like Steamboat was a monster when he turns it on. He was incredibly aggressive, and the best arm drags in the history of the business. But also, he could go. The guy just had he has a gas tank that never expired.
And I don't know if they were selling them like this, but you certainly got a Bruce Lee feel a little bit off.
Yeah.
Like the whole dragon. And I'm not sure Steamboat's ethnicity or anything like that, but it felt like they were trading a little bit off. And that's one thing. Yeah. Ethnicity was very interchangeable in wrestling in the 80s.
Sure. Yeah. And it was a much bigger deal then than it is now. I mean, every stereotype, every racial stereotype was played into in the 80s and 90s.
Right. When you play in the back of the room, you can be broad.
Exactly. But the visual contrast of that also, as you were talking about the ring entrances, where Steamboat was like the family man, and even though he was the baby face, like it was hard to get behind somebody so earnest and white bread. Whereas Flair, who's obviously built up as this Lothario with the 40 women, and the Rolex watches and the suits and the airplanes, but he was the guy you live vicariously through, even though he was the bad guy and you're supposed to hate him. He was more of a fantasy idea of like, well, geez, if I were a pro wrestler with all that money and the world champion, that's kind of how I'd act. But together they're magic in the ring. They complement each other perfectly.
It's funny in the promos, Steamboat is almost like dying to give the title back to Flair. He's just like, I won the title. It was a very fun match. And they're like, oh, we have this footage to show you. And it's like, whatever. I think it's just footage. Flair's like photos on the rope or something like that. And then he's like, all right, man, we're going to do this again. All right. The fair is fair. And he's just like, well, it's funny at the time. So did you watch those matches as they happened? And if so,
yes, I watched them as they happened.
Okay. Yeah. Was it a big deal for you when Steamboat won? And was it a big deal for you when he lost again?
Yeah, it was a massive deal for me when Flair lost, just because Steamboat had never been a world champion in the WWF. He was the Intercontinental. Yeah, he was the Intercontinental champion.
He was the guy who hit in the neck with the ring belt, and that whole
right.
That was where I knew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the most famous thing he did.
It was excellent.
His larynx was crushed. Yep. And then he beat Savage for the title in WrestleMania 3, which was at the time the greatest WWF match, I think, of all time.
The greatest scripted match in the history of wrestling.
Right. But yeah, I mean that was Steamboat pushed as a world title contender against, at the time, the guy considered to be the best wrestler in the world, the best world champion. And Steamboat beating him was a big deal. But it wasn't surprising that he lost the title again. But he lost the title in the third match, right? Like there was a rubber match, or no.
Steamboat won the first one. The second one he won with under dubious circumstances, and the third
one, the double chicken wing and
yeah.
You're right.
All those matches held up too. I was
right.
I think I'd watched them when I got the Flair DVD that came out in the mid 2000s, but I didn't have a lot of appreciation. It was sort of like when I read Watchmen after having not read a comic book in 15 years, and I'm like, well, I know this is good, but I don't know why. And when I'm watching them now, you're like, holy shit, these two are just tearing it up.
Right.
I mean, it's the green trunks and just, oh man, like he's just like, and then, man, it was wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about how this inspired you. This podcast is talking about creative people. Sure. You obviously you now work. You work for Screen Rant. You were involved in bringing a relationship with AEW there, where you're getting to interview a lot of their talent. And so let's link this all together a little bit. How did this childhood love of this kind of lead along the way to where you are now?
Well, I grew up loving superheroes. I loved comic books and stuff. And pro wrestling is basically that. It's an alternate world where with a certain set of rules where everything's decided in combat. Kind of like a superhero story is, like
I had that note to bring that up because for me they were very tied, and a lot of the people who loved one loved the other. And for me who loved hip hop, that was the third thing in that thing. They all sort of like.
I'll tell you. So in the late '90s, I lived in New York. And at the time, my friends and I who loved wrestling, we put together a newsletter called Our So-Called Sport. And it was based on the fact that we had a cable access show in Medford, Massachusetts for 2 seasons, also about backstage talking about wrestling. It was basically the McLaughlin group.
Shit, I remember I never would have I remember you talking about this years ago. This is amazing.
Yeah. So
you still have that
my
stuff?
Friends, yeah. I have a VHS cassette of some of our episodes, which my friends are all totally embarrassed by. And they never want it seen in the light of day. But so it was basically the McLaughlin group. It was the 4 of us sitting, in a semicircle with a giant cardboard cutout of the Undertaker behind us, and we just
Lance
talked about
with this?
Lance was the host. Yeah, he was our guy. He was the guy who set it up. So and because he was involved with Medford Public Access at the time when he was a teenager. So and then I moved to New York, and then that show ended. And then we just turned into an email newsletter, where we would write reviews of Raw and SmackDown didn't exist then, Raw and Nitro. And so, when I wrote a review of Raw or wrote a review of Nitro, I would weave in all these comic book jokes and references. And then so what happened was somehow, I don't remember how we had like an email list of people who were subscribed to us, but somehow some people at Marvel Comics got on the list. And so do you even know the story?
I know we've talked a little bit when I was working on a graphic novel a few years ago about that you had some relationships with people then, but we never got into how you knew them.
Yeah, okay, so one day out of the blue, this is like February of '97, I got an email from Andy Ball, who was an editor at Marvel Comics. He was a Spider-Man editor, and he was like, "Hey, a lot of us at Marvel, we read our
bullpen. They're talking about the bullpen."
Yeah. Because a lot of us love wrestling, and we read your newsletter. Like, are you in New York? Because if you're in New York, come on down. Like, hang out with us. Like, we get together and we watch Raw and Nitro every Monday night. And as it happens, Andy lived. I lived on 3rd Avenue and 16th Street. Andy lived in Murray Hill, which is about 20 blocks north. So just a 10-minute walk up 3rd Avenue. So I took him up on it. And so I met Andy. I met Bill Roseman, who to this day is one of my best friends. He was your man at Marvel at the time. Today, he is the president of Marvel Games. He is a massive deal. I met Mark Bernardo and some other guys who at the time were the Spider-Man editors, the Spider-Man group editors. And so every Monday night, I would go up to Andy's house. We'd order buffalo wings. We'd watch Nitro, and then we'd watch Raw, and we just hang out and and chill out. And then that's how I kind of got involved with those guys. Which is crazy. And so
it's crazy. It's blowing my mind because it's like, not only is it the Marvel guys, but that obviously wasn't the best time at Marvel, but working on Spider-Man is the best job at Marvel. Like, I would say that.
Well, as it happens, a few months later, the big bloodletting happened at Spider-Man, and Andy and Mark Bernardo, and then they were all fired.
Yeah.
That was during the whole clone saga.
Ben Reilly, and I feel like there's gonna be, we'll be seeing that not too long in the future. I feel like we're long overdue for that to be brought to the screen.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so that's kind of how that happened. And then I'm still friends with Bill Roseman. I used to sleep on his couch and hang out, and his wife used to make me dinner, and and when he moved to LA, I started hanging out with him here. He actually left LA and he's moved back to Tennessee. But I've been friends with him for 25 years. It's crazy.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I forgot what the original question was.
So we're talking about just how the love of wrestling influenced how you got you were today. Where's that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So but it's always been tied to superheroes and comic books and stuff. And wrestling was just an actual living universe you could visit. Yep. Had its own good guys and bad guys, good
had
versus
its own
evil.
rules.
had its own rules, yeah. And but you could literally sit there and watch them fight it out for whatever it is that they had to settle. And
and every episode was a starting point too for somebody, and that's something that they say about wrestling is like there's going to be someone in the crowd who's seen the first wrestling show tonight, and so you have to appeal to both them and the people who've seen everything. And comic books shares that.
Yeah, and also, a lot of the wrestlers are also fans of the same things. Kofi Kingston is a giant Marvel fan, for instance, and so many other guys are into all the same pop culture that we're into, and it all bleeds together. Jay Cargill cosplay as a She-Hulk, 2 weeks ago on the pay-per-view.
I know a guy who makes these really cool Marvel heads on Instagram, and he told me, and Danhausen just was a customer of ours recently, and it's like it wasn't any, I was like, you got to make one of those at Danhausen, but it was a different character, he said. But like it's just, it feels like it's the community aspect of it is pretty wonderful, like and it's there's so much fun to talk about, like what there is on the screen, what there is behind the scenes, what's real, what isn't. It's almost never ending, like, because you can just go, there's so many directions you can go in, and the tones are all over the place. And that's the thing that I think that really should have known that it was fake when I was a kid, was that like the tone was so inconsistent. Like they're essentially treating something that really should be an arrestable offense, like, but instead they're selling tickets. Like that to me should have been a clue. And like that's one of the things too that I think I would say I'm pretty neutral on people like the Young Bucks, and like I enjoy them at times, I really like them at times, but in general it's like I haven't really missed them on television, now that the AW all the stuff's going on. But like the people like, well, the super kick, they've destroyed the super kick. I'm like, look, I watch Edge punt Randy Orton in the head, and he should never have walked again. Like, and that was like one move. And you're just like, I can't get too precious about the scale of like, well, the DDT used to be a finishing move, and now it's like, the middle of the match. I'm just like,
the one thing that does get me on that subject of like, killing a move, which I don't believe a move is killed, by the way, but
it's how you do it, when you do it, and what
but I watch like Bryan Danielson now, which his matches in AEW are incredible. Yes. But he'll hit the running knee, and it's not. It used to be his finish in WWE. That knee, when he connects it to the head, took everybody out, and now like everybody kicks out.
Yeah, they do. What do they call that? Every time they say it, I don't quite get it. The something knee. I'm just like, I could look.
I don't recall, but that running knee. Everybody in WWE, it beat Triple H, it beat Randy Orton, it won him his world title.
Yeah, with the fuzzy boots. I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody ever kicked out of that knee, but in AEW, it's not even a finish. And so it's one of those things that I always like, that's the only thing that always gets me. Is like that knee should take everybody out, but now he has to.
It's funny. It's like, so where do you go from here? Because the whole idea of like a finishing move is pretty absurd. It's like, oh, this is like, we're all going to pretend like this is the move that when I do it, you just got to lay there. Like, that's just like, we've all agreed upon that,
It always makes sense to me though.
It does, and it does make sense to me, and I enjoy it. But like, but then over the course like 20 years, they've started to destroy the finishing move. Where it's like, the Ring of Honors, where there's so many kickouts, and now that bleeds into the AEW style. And it's like the plus of it is that like people love those false finishes, and false finishes are a huge part of AEW. Mm-hmm. I think they're the AEW people. Absolutely. Yeah, AEW seems like to me like they really are playing to the crowd in the building sometimes more than they're playing to the crowd at home, which and I get so excited when I get engaged in these shows. I feel like I'm there, so I love it. And but like the finisher doesn't mean as much anymore, and to me, I think that's almost sort of a good thing, except for when it means that somebody thinks they need to jump off the roof and do 20 tilt-a-whirls to like
I call it video game wrestling, where you have to hit finish 2 or 3 times before it actually works. And that's kind of what happened. Like, it's not that the finisher is no longer works, but now you just have to do it a couple more times. Whereas before, once was enough.
Right.
I think the only finish still in AEW, at least, that no one is kicked out of is the one-winged angel, Kenny Omega's move.
Yep.
And one day someone's gonna do it. Or unless it's already happened. Didn't Hangman kick out of it? I don't remember.
He might have, but I don't know, because it seems like a blur the bit that they were back. But it's I had something in my mind. I just lost it. So let's go back to a little bit we're talking about. So you met those guys, the Spider-Man dudes from Marvel, and became friends with them.
Mhm.
We were friendly around the same time. Like you said, I think we met at BU. You had already, I think, graduated. And we met through Alex.
Yeah.
And then when we got out of there, we started watching pay-per-views together and stuff like that. And you were always writing for, I think it was you. I don't know if anybody else wrote for Back of the Head, if that was just your site.
No, that was mine. Back of the Head was always mine. Back of the Head for me was an outlet because I at the time I wanted to be in film, but I didn't know how to do it.
This is like around 2000, right?
I
Like late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I thought I wanted to be a screenwriter, but I never really put it together. Even though I believe I have some talent, some ability in that field.
Same here. Yep.
I worked with our friend Alex Merkin for years. I was his assistant. We made films together. But the more we made films, the more I realized I don't know if I actually want to be in the business. It was
funny. I had a similar experience working with Alex.
Yeah, nothing against Alex.
No, nothing against Alex, but it made me realize, this is too collaborative. I don't feel like I have a place here, and I don't feel like this is for me, and I don't really want to live the place that I do.
Right. But so it was a long struggle to try to find an outlet. And for me, it was just like, well, I like movies. I like talking about movies. I like conversing about movies, and I like joking about movies. So Back of the Head for me was just an outlet. I could write long movie reviews or short movie reviews, and the format never mattered to me. I could tell jokes about movies, and I never cared who read it. It didn't matter to me at all.
I remember reading them at my desk at office going, this is some funny shit. And we had similar tastes too, so that helped. And we also disagreed about stuff too. And I've always really respected your opinion. So like you were someone too. There were sometimes I remember shooting you up like, yo, I'm going to see this. Like, do you think this is something? What do you think about this? And like, I like that we agree on a lot of stuff, but disagree on other stuff too. I find a very good resource like that. That's what I'm using you.
Yeah. And also tastes evolve. So like how I felt about something 10 years ago isn't necessarily how I felt about it, how I feel about it now. But yeah, so Back of the Head for me was just an outlet, but as it turns out, I put 10 years of writing movie reviews into this blog, and then what happened with Screen Rant was, it was my origin story for Screen Rant it was New Year's Eve 2017, and another friend of mine I met online through a wrestling message board. His name is Albert Ching. He was at the time the managing editor of Comic Book Resources, one of the big, CBR, one of the big comic book sites.
Regular basis, yeah, great site.
Yeah, so he was an online friend of mine who I'd met I think once at a Comic-Con, but he was a good guy. And then so he put out a tweet about a woman named Hannah Shaw Williams who was the editor for Screen Rant, the features editor for Screen Rant, and he was basically like, "Hey, Hannah's great. You should write for her." So I didn't even know what Screen Rant was, but I read the tweet, and then she said, "Hey, I'm looking for writers to write about movies and TV." I was like, "Hey, I could do that." So I put together, purely on a whim, I picked out 3 movie reviews I thought were good on Back of the Head, and then I wrote up a little cover letter and I emailed it to her, and then I completely forgot about it. Then 3 weeks later, I'm at the Sprint store. I'm buying a new cell phone, and I get an email from Hannah Shaw Williams that says, "Hey, I want to hire you. Here's a contract." And I was like, what? So I read the email a couple of times, and then I sent it to my friend, Sean Cronin, who is a U.S. attorney in Miami. And he's also my lifelong friend since we were 10 or 11 years old. And he's kind of my lawyer. And but he's also a giant nerd. He's a big cosplayer.
I have a friend like that too. It's good to have a good lifelong friend who's a lawyer. They come in very handy.
Yeah, they do come in very handy, especially if they're a giant nerd.
Yeah.
And so I sent him the email. I was like, "Hey, is this a real thing? What do you think?" And he, like 10 minutes later, he emails me back, and he's like, "If I were you, I'd sign it." I was like, "Okay." So I signed it, and then the original contract for Screen Rant was as a features contributor. I was supposed to write 10 feature articles a month. That has now ballooned to 60 articles a week. No, 60 articles a month, so 15 a week. Yeah. And I'm now I'm
sure you have time for this interview?
I make time now. I've gotten a lot faster about writing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's evolved into a lot of things. I mean, it was a long process, but now I'm pretty much like the Star Trek guy at Screen Rant. I lead our Star Trek feature coverage. I also brought a lot of other things to Screen Rant. Like nobody was covering Downton Abbey, for instance, before I brought it up. Cobra Kai was something I suggested, and I'm the lead for Cobra Kai's features, and and other things as well. So I've kind of expanded outside of the Marvel realm, which was my original bread and butter, along with a few other things. But and then AEW came along, And
Yeah.
this is actually an interesting story I think we wanted to get into, which was, so I went to Double or Nothing in Vegas with my friend Jeff.
And that was
And then
right now we're talking on September 24th, 2022. So Double or Nothing
yes,
was how long ago was that?
yeah, so that was Memorial Weekend of 2022.
Okay, so
That was the
that
end
was
of
earlier
it.
this year. Punk was already in the company.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. This is the
Oh,
place.
the title. I won the
Yeah.
title from Hangman at that
Oh,
show.
that was that match.
That was
Okay.
that match. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, with the infamous
Yeah.
promo the week before. Yes, that's why you mentioned getting into this. All right, cool. I just want
Right.
to mention one thing before we jump into that. Say
Sure.
I'll forget to come back to this. What you just said is really like the classic case of like the 10-year overnight success story, where like
Yeah.
you just
Give
kept
us 5
doing
more
this.
years.
Yeah, well, yeah, even longer. And like, but you kept
Yeah.
doing this because you loved it. And that's something like I always tell people when I get to talk to young artists, I'm like, just stick with it. Every day that you're doing this, the day that somebody else has quit. And every day that you're
Mm-hmm.
doing it, it becomes less of something you do and more of something you are. And when you interview somebody, there's going to be less people like you. And when somebody interviews for the big job, they're going to see that there's going to be less people like you, that it's not what you do, it's who you are. And that is really what makes you, be able to succeed in a business, to some degree. There's a lot of different ways in the creative fields, but that's something for me that I've always
Sure.
felt that it's like just not giving up gets you halfway there. And like, I remember you telling me about that at the time, and I was like, God damn, like I was really happy for you because like
Thank you,
I
man.
had heard a Screen Rant. I read Screen Rant all the time, and I was like, it's just I understood that what a level of validation that must have felt like, and I was like, it helped me motivate myself. I was at that time I was coming out of like an
Okay.
11-year relationship, and I was trying to get refocus my art, and I remember thinking, John did it
Yeah.
like. It actually meant a lot to me. As I'm thinking about this now, it did. I remember thinking it was a big inspiration for me to really focus.
That's
Thank you.
incredible, man. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. I did feel like there was a sense of validation to not just getting the job, but eventually becoming good at it.
Yeah,
Um,
that helps too.
yeah, and it was a long process to get good at it, I think,
Yeah.
and I don't mind saying I'm not with somebody who pats myself on the back very much, but I am good at my job. I feel like
Right.
I've earned the right to
There's
at least
always a
say
little bit
that.
of fake it till you make it when you take that next step up. It's
Yeah,
like, and like they know, it's everybody knows. It's like, I've managed people, that it's like this person's here and this, I know they can be here in a year.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's been an incredible run. I've been very fortunate also within that Screen Rant. I mean, it's been a lot of hard work, but also I've gotten amazing opportunities
Yeah.
because of it, which have also paid off incredibly. So, and like for instance, Star Trek has become, and I've been a fan since like the early '90s of Star Trek, and it's also been something I love. But now it's become this amazing thing where I feel like I'm actually part of the Star Trek family. I've been welcomed in. I have a really great relationship with the people at
I've
Paramount.
seen that. Yeah.
I've I've interacted with the producers of the current shows and the actors of the current shows. I was able to interview them at Comic-Con. I interviewed them at Star Trek Day. I've hung out with them. I've gone to the VIP parties and actually just like spent time with them as people, and just chatted with them and stuff. And it's amazing. So there's that aspect as well that I think the 20-year process to get to here kind of prepared me for, because when we were starting out, coming out of BU with Alex, and we were dreaming about making films, it was always about that. It was always about, we wanted to be at the Spielberg level. We wanted to be making huge films with huge stars,
Right.
and
In the room with people who
every,
were as excited as we were, essentially.
yeah, and so I felt like I was prepared at least for that aspect of it, because we also met amazing people along the way
Yeah.
through Alex, through the actors and the filmmakers he was able to work with, and who are still friends of
Yeah,
his and
we made
friends of
that
ours
short
too.
film with Adrian Grenier, and the Alex we're talking
Yeah,
about. I'm Alex Merkin. Check out some of his films. I recently got back in touch with him after I saw him on the HBO documentary where he was talking about
yes,
Brittany Murphy,
with Brittany
which
Murphy. Yeah,
it was like, it was funny. I hadn't I hadn't heard a lot of that stuff when it went on, but I heard a little bit from people who were involved, and the story that Alex told there was the exact same thing I'd heard back in the day, which I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess I heard but he came off so well, and I was really sorry. It really broke my heart, and he's
yeah,
a great dude with a really great heart, and he's very, very talented.
yeah,
Check his stuff
and
out.
incredibly talented and incredibly
Yes,
generous.
very,
Always been
very
so generous.
generous, and it's like you can't shake his passion either. Like he's got it.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's infectious too. So
I mean, Alex lives nearby here. He lives 10 minutes from me. You know, I see him all the time. I use his office for interviews sometimes. So
I got to get out there at some point to see, especially now they're all in the
absolutely,
same
man.
area. You know, some other friends out there.
Yeah, you
So
got to come hang with us.
yeah, I will. And Evan too. Evan, our friend Evan, who's
Yeah.
was doing Tom Cruise impersonations.
Right. I mean, that's a funny little claim to fame we both have. One of our oldest friends is the greatest Tom Cruise impersonator in the world.
Yeah. I remember getting a text one day from my best friend from childhood's little sister, and she was like, "I know you said you had a friend who was a Tom Cruise impersonator. I think he's on Entertainment Tonight right now." I'm like, "Yep, that's it." Like, he's someone too that I may reach out to at some point. I know he's very busy. I may have to pay his cameo fee to, like, you know, talk about stuff, but he's pretty amazing at not Tom Cruise, but yeah,
he might give you some time. He might give you a discount on the cameo.
Yeah.
You know, he might give you the friends and family discount.
But yeah, that dude can definitely talk, man. He's hilarious. He's just
He really is.
When I think back to those times, like I remember just being at some parties, a Christmas party at in Alex's parents' place with him and Mike Kwan Jackson, other, you know, talented dude, and just talking. It was just magical. It's sort of in my mind, sort of melds with like Eyes Wide Shut, one of my favorite movies back then. The lighting, like that apartment was so cool, and it was like, you know, it was like a dream, like New York, and it sort of melds in my mind a little bit. It gives me like the warm memories, you know.
Yeah. Those are good times.
Yeah, it definitely were, man. And I'm glad everybody's still doing creative stuff too. So, all right, so let's go back to what yeah.
So I'm sorry. What did you want to talk about?
Let's talk about Double or Nothing. Let's get into what's going on now with AEW, because I think this probably won't get released for a little bit. I think I'm gonna do a season of 10, and once I have maybe 5 of them done, I'll start releasing them. So maybe like a month or two, so we can talk about like what's going on now, where we think we're gonna be then, and let's actually get back to Double or Nothing. What you were saying, where you the show with Hangman Page and Punk, that was maybe your first introduction to working with AEW.
Yeah, well, as it happens, that weekend, all the AEW guys were staying at the Mandalay Bay, which is right next to the T-Mobile Arena where they did the Double or Nothing pay-per-view. So Jeff and I were vacationing in Vegas, you know, for the pay-per-view, and we just hung out at Mandalay Bay. And as it happens, if you just hung out in the lobby in the casino, all of AEW was there. We walked by or passed by everyone. Like I said hello to Anthony Bowens. I said hello to Adam Page and Adam Cole and a few other people, Malachi Black. We just ran into them, but basically everybody was there. There's some people. Taz was just sitting in the sports area, like a sports betting area, like the whole time. And we didn't want to bother him, you know. But
No, you don't want to mess with Taz. I was walking
Exactly.
out big time. I was one of those people who was like, Hook and Action Bronson. Yes. I actually turned off the show after. I'm like, I'll watch the rest tomorrow. That's right. I'm in for that.
But it got in my head. Now since I've been doing interviews for Screen Rant, and, you know, I've gotten to talk to some amazing people. It's like I want to talk to these people, and I want Screen Rant to pay me to talk to AEW. So I was like, how can I make this happen? And I spent the week. I was in Vegas for a week before I came back home, and I was, you know, I hang out at the pool at the resort I was staying at, my parents' timeshare, and I just thought all the time about how I could make this happen. Like, how do I broker an AEW relationship with Screen Rant and have Screen Rant actually pay me to talk to these people? I just want to meet some wrestlers, and I just want to hang out with them and talk to them. So the Saturday after I got home from Vegas, I'm in LA, and I went to LAX Fan Fest. It was a little Comic-Con for wrestlers, and there's a lot of AEW people there. I met Jungle Boy, I met Dr. Britt Baker. Actually, hang on, I'll be right back.
And Jungle Boy, for those that don't know,
I very, very rarely will buy an actual photo. See if I
it's not really coming in because of the background, but I'll just mention too that for those who don't know, Jungle Boy is the son of the late Luke Perry from 90210 fame, and he's an amazing wrestler. He's on AEW Wrestling. He does a great job. John obviously knows him. And I
don't know him.
I know. And I'll mention too about him. You gotta, if you haven't seen the David Arquette documentary, the David Arquette Won't Die or whatever. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
You have? You got to watch this. It's about David Arquette coming back into wrestling, and Jungle Boy's in it, and Luke Perry's in it. And I gotta say, it's some pretty moving shit. Like it's somebody, and Courtney Cox is in it too, and they're long since split up, so it's entertaining. I highly recommend it. You gotta watch it. Actually, I gotta watch it again. But all right, so you're talking about the Fan Fest.
So I mean, I met Adam Cole, I met Britt, I met Britt Baker, I met Anna Jay.
These are big names in wrestling now. For people who don't know AEW as well, AEW is sort of coming up a little bit, competing with WWE, and these are the top stars of the company.
Yeah, they are some of the top stars. I met Jamie Hayter, who was wonderful, like one of the nicest people I've ever met in wrestling. So, but it was Anna Jay I was talking to a little bit, and I was like, hey, I write for Screen. She was the one who came up to me when we were talking. She was like, how do I know you? I recognize you. I'm like, I don't know. How could you know me? Like, do you watch Star Trek? How would you know me? But we couldn't figure out how she might have known me. But I was like, well, listen, I write for Screen Rant. What would it take to do an interview with you? And she was like, well, she gave me the name of who to contact as Screen Rant. So the moment I got home, I fired off an email to the AEW person. I was like, hey, I write for Screen Rant. We do a lot of coverage of pro wrestling now. We're going to do even more. We would love to set up a relationship and have AEW talent come in and interview them and help promote your pay-per-views, help promote your Dynamite, help promote Rampage. I'm on the West Coast. Let's make something happen. And so 2 weeks went by, and all of a sudden I get an email back from John Schneider at AEW, and it's like, we would love to work with you. And I was like, well, I should probably tell my boss I did this now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's easier to be forgiven than to get permission.
I forgot to mention to my boss that I did this. And I completely forgot about it. I tend to forget about things after I do them.
Yeah, so, especially because in the creative field, so much stuff doesn't pan out. You can't get too attached to stuff. You have to go on, do your part, and then because if you hound it, it's not going to happen, and like it becomes a pleasant surprise, like planting a flower. When someday it blooms, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember planting that.
Yeah. So as it turns out, Screen Rant has been wanting to get involved with WWE and AEW for a while, and WWE has always been harder to broach.
Press friendly.
But somehow I connected AEW and Screen Rant together, and so it became my baby. I was given a green light to just whatever you want to do. If you can get interviews, whatever, just we're in. So that's what happened. We have a relationship with AEW now, which is going really well. We're able to have access to their talent. We're on their press lists and stuff. Hopefully, when they do more shows here in LA, I'll be able to actually physically go and we can do some stuff with them there.
But sure they will, because that last show where MJF was there, you had in that promo, people were losing their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I mentioned before the How Does Get Made podcast. The hosts of that, Paul Scheer and June Dan Raphael, were in the crowd. I don't think they've ever been with their kids. I don't think they've ever been to a wrestling show before, and they were like blown away. They were like, they didn't have the context. I don't think either of it, and I was just like, man, I wish I was in the building that night.
AEW shows are just incredible. They're incredible to be at.
I haven't been to one live. I gotta go. WWE shows feel like you're going to a taping of a TV show to some. I don't know what they're like now at Triple H are, but you feel like you're almost more of like of a prop to some degree.
Right. You're a plant. You're a plant in the corner. Whereas AEW is so interactive, and it's really meant there. Everybody goes balls to the wall, 110 miles an hour to entertain you. Right. In whatever fashion that they can entertain you in, whether it's in-ring action or an MGF promo where he just destroys somebody on the microphone and you just you get so caught up in it, or Darby Allin will do something ridiculous like fling himself off the top of the stage and the coffin drop onto the table. Those guys go nuts. But the biggest thing that's come out of it so far,
go for it.
Was Comic-Con. AEW was at Comic-Con, and so was Screen Rant, and we were doing interviews and stuff. So I was able to have the 6 biggest stars of AEW come into our Screen Rant booth as they were doing press for the entire time they were there, and I got to sit down and talk to them. I mean, I wish I had more time. I wish I had more than 6 minutes because I really want to get into
a cast. Punk traveled across the country in a cast to have that conversation.
Yeah, he was not the best mood.
Yeah, so I don't want to mention this. Someone had hinted off to me that maybe over the summer he wasn't too happy at AEW, and I was almost gonna I almost gonna text you like, what sort of mood he was in, but I didn't want to be hitting you up for inside information. But
great, I'll tell you that much.
And the pain itself for a guy, CM Punk is straight edge, so he's not going to be taking any medication or anything. So if there's pain, he's feeling it. There's a guy who cracked his skull and came back in half the time he should have. So he's a little he's on his own level.
I definitely chalked it up to the fact that he was in pain walking around in that cast. But he was very kind to me. He introduced himself as Phil, which I thought, I didn't quite know how to do it. I just said so. I didn't ask him what he wanted to be called.
Sort of like
he
Eminem
said,
saying, "Hi, I'm Marshall." It's like,
yeah, right, yeah, like, that was great. I got to do the thing with Orange Cassidy where you just you walk up to him and just and
yeah.
touch the top of the wrist. And Orange Cassidy never broke character. He never breaks character.
What a great gimmick to have for dealing with the public. I'm so like, you're just if you're not
my job
sort of like, but like it's like he's doing, he knows what he had to do to get himself over. But it's just like it's if you deal with the public, if you're not just totally tuned out, they're like disappointed. You're like, what a great gig. You sign an autograph, like I'm sure his autographs are like a little squiggle,
And it was tough not to be starstruck, I mean, Bryan Danielson, CM Punk.
Oh God,
Danielson was so kind. He's the nicest guy, so easy to talk to. But what was actually, of the 6 people I talked to, the 7th guy who was there was actually the nicest one. Ricky Starks was there. And
rising star Ricky Starks.
And I walked up. I made it a point to walk up to everybody and introduce myself and shake their hand and stuff. But Ricky Starks was just
kind of shake hands.
Yeah, exactly. I knew this from being a wrestling fan. But Ricky Starks, I walked up to and I just introduced myself and I chatted with him really, really quickly. He was so kind. He was so, and I was like, why aren't you in the panel? Like, why aren't you joining us? But he just wasn't part of that press deal. But he was such a great guy. He was so nice. He was so appreciative of just like talking to a fan who obviously enjoys the product.
And that's one thing with AEW in general that they'll say is, they have a lot of like I like Danhausen. There's a guy like Ethan Page who never really did it for me as much on AEW television. But when I started actually watching his blogs and seeing him interact, I sort of got more of an affinity to him. And then I started looking at him a little differently on television. When he entered the firm, I was like, oh, good. I was excited for him. So I was like, I know Dan Lambert's great. People love him. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but like I see why he belongs there. But I was really happy to see him get that opportunity, and part of it is because I grew to know him as a person a little bit, and I think that's something that WWE has always been very protective of the personal lives of their wrestlers, and I think AEW is a little ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, they're definitely more fan friendly, which is not to say WWE talent isn't fan friendly. If you happen to run into them, for the most part, they're also really great and very kind. But a
lot of them have gone through press training too at WWE, I think. And that may be less the case at AEW, unless guys who come from WWE, but it's probably less of a priority because it is a more raw product. No pun intended.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, so we've been very fortunate so far, and I'm excited to see where this AEW relationship can grow. It's funny, when Saraya debuted, I fired off an email. I was like, "Hey, is she doing press? Because I want to talk to her."
Questions, yeah. There's like a lot of questions. It really felt like in the moment the announcers didn't even know, which they're great announcers, so they might. I love that blurring line where I'm like, do they know? But I felt like they didn't but I was like, they got me. I didn't think that was coming.
Yeah, I mean, just from what I gleaned from Twitter and some social media stuff, from what happened backstage, she was hidden from everybody, and nobody knew. The announcers didn't know. I don't know if the talent knew, if like the Brit knew or Tony Storm knew, the wrestlers in the ring knew. Certainly Tony Khan knew, but I think it was kept quiet for the rest of the locker room and for the announcers to have that pure shock value, because nobody expected that.
It's funny too, because I didn't expect it. You say nobody expected it, which is very true. She left WWE basically insinuating that she wanted to wrestle. So we really shouldn't have been that surprised, but this wasn't on my radar at all. And I was so exactly. The same like last night. They got the Great Muta out there last night. I heard there was going to be a big surprise, and I didn't ruin it for me. And I was glad I didn't, because I just got introduced to the Great Muta really through the Clash of Champions stuff. I watched prepare for this conversation. Yep. I was like, I got a lot of Muta to catch. I got to fill in the blanks between like 89 and what I watched.
35 years of Muta.
Yeah. But it was like they're really good at fun stuff like that, and it's the unfortunate thing, we got to hope that, a lot of these surprises are people who, were deemed that were not healthy enough or had, issues with WWE. And we hope that, they end up working out good, because a lot of times in wrestling, there's the pop and then there's what comes after. But Paige Saraya seems like a very smart young woman. I just watched the interview with Renee Paquette she did. I think I'm saying her name right. Mm-hmm. And she's got a real mind for the business. And I think, she was born into it. Yes. I think Britt Baker needs the counterpart. in that division.
Mhm.
And I think Jade Cargill's coming along. They have to figure out how to make them all coexist. But I think you need a Saraya to play off Britt Baker right now.
Yeah, and Saraya is obviously the biggest female star that's ever walked in the door. I mean, just from the
Yes.
pop she got.
Yep.
But she also, I mean, God, not just from her WWE stardom, but also she's mainstream. She
did a movie.
There was a movie about her life.
Yeah.
She was a huge deal. So hopefully she's healthy and she can work and she can wrestle because I mean,
Edge came back. We've seen people come back, so it's real tough.
Danielson.
It's right. And it's like, and obviously AEW just did the angle with Punk, which we'll get to momentarily, about when he came back, whether his foot hurt or not. And that was it was I guess obviously now that we know, I'm guessing Punk probably wasn't. He was probably in a certain state of mind coming in, so I'm sure that I
think so, yeah.
And I'd say I don't have really insider knowledge on this. I had mentioned I'd heard something over the summer, but I don't have insider wrestling knowledge really at all. I have stuff that I hear from sources, but I have no sources myself. I don't really talk to people in the industry. But obviously CM Punk came back to fight John Moxley, or to wrestle John Moxley, and the match lasted a very short period of time because his foot was re-injured, and then they scheduled the rematch. Kind of a weird angle. What did you? Let's go back actually. What did you when the Hangman Page promo happened, where he had that mention about CM Punk before Double or Nothing? I remember watching it going, I thought that maybe it felt just like kind of a clunky moment. And I was like, oh, Paige isn't the promo that Punk is. And I didn't really understand that there was the undercurrent of the Colt Cabana and all that. What did you think when you saw that?
I didn't get it at all. The whole mention of Adam Page talking about how different he was in catering, and I didn't equate Colt Cabana to it one bit. I didn't understand any of it or why it was mentioned. I certainly didn't know up until much later on that Punk was furious about it.
Right.
And
because Hangman feels like sort of like he's stapled on the edge of the Dark Order. It's like if you had told me that Hangman Page and Colt Cabana never met before, I'd probably be like, and obviously they have, but like they don't feel connected on television.
Right. Yeah. So I didn't know what any of that was. And Double or Nothing happened. Punk won the title. He hurt his foot. He was gone for whatever it was, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. But I did not know that the entire time CM Punk was furious about that one promo that Adam Page cut. And then, Punk went into business for himself when he came back and cut that promo, challenging Adam Page to come out, even though I don't think he was even there. And the whole point was to make him look bad, I guess.
Right. Which we have to understand. We have to believe that CM Punk had some conversations with Tony. He did say the one thing that hasn't come much is CM Punk said the apology has to be as loud as the offense or something like that. And I haven't heard a story yet about what that apology that didn't. If he's insinuating there was an apology that didn't meet his standards, it at least infers there was an attempt to reconcile this behind backstage.
Right.
Still doesn't give him to credit. You shouldn't go into business yourself on live television. You're risking other people's jobs doing it. I should make that perfectly clear. That people rely on AEW for a living, and just by doing that, by what Punk did, he is in essence potentially putting risk in his job. Because as we see with Warner now, a few moves could really hurt the company.
Right. But I guess in Punk's mind, it was a receipt for something that happened back in May or April or May.
Which is wrestling fans eat up too. So that's the other side of it. Is that it's like people they love a good receipt in wrestling, and Punk's a good guy to be at the register. I
actually loved the really short 4-minute match where Moxley beat him for the title. I actually loved it because A, it was so unexpected, and B, to me it validated Moxley, who was incredible this past summer. As the interim champion, he had to carry the company. I grew up in an era where Hulk Hogan wrestled once every 3 months, and you never saw him wrestle on TV. And the fact that a guy like John Moxley, the world champion, was on TV main eventing every single week, bleeding buckets in the ring, having wars against
just coming out of rehab for alcohol too. You literally felt like you were watching John Moxley just become a new person and shed. It was like he was bleeding to purge himself of the old him. And it's like, I'm not a big fan of the blood, and the blood's a big turn off me at AEW. And I feel like somebody must have said something about that, because I feel like there's been a lot less blood, and I like this.
A little bit, yeah. I would say.
But like, it really felt like you were watching something true to John Moxley was shedding. John Moxley was sort of shedding his soul a little bit.
Yeah, and he was carrying the company. He was doing an incredible job. So I thought
and you
it
could
was
argue
great.
some of those matches probably shouldn't have been 50-50 like they were, but he was still putting on a show that people loved and enjoyed. And, it's like
Yeah,
AEW
totally.
sometimes is better in the moment than it is over the long-term storytelling, which I hope, sometimes they're really good at that, but like he gave us a lot of great moments this summer.
Yeah, he really did. He was an incredible champion, to the point where I didn't think Punk should have gone over at All Out. I was just like I understand I understand Tony's plan. That the plan was always CM Punk to be world champion. The plan was for him to have that belt for a while and validate his year-long comeback, and then build to a feud with MJF. I understood what the grand scheme was and why Tony wanted to stick with it.
Right.
But at the same time, something else happened that summer, which was Jon Moxley, yeah. and I felt like it was a mistake to put the brakes on it. As it turns out, they went through a whole lot of roller coaster loops to put the title right back on Jon Moxley this week.
Right. And just for anybody who might not know about this, so what happened was CM Punk comes back. He wrestles a match with Jon Moxley that only lasts a few minutes, and they insinuate that his foot is broken. Watching it again, it was just with the injury to put him out with, where John met him over the summer and potentially in a decent amount of pain. Well, we know he was in pain, but so then they set up a rematch. Watching it live, I was like, maybe his foot is broken. I'm like, I'm always willing to believe, and it's like, it is a surgically repaired foot. It's like and I've had little foot problems, and it doesn't take a whole lot to be wrong with your foot to really have it resonate through your entire body. So I was like, all right, we'll see where this goes. I was at least interested to go, okay, they're going to make you pay for the real thing, because it seemed kind of foolish they're going to give away this match on a Wednesday. They're kind of popping a rating to some degree, maybe, I don't know, but I thought it was a good setup too. It made me interested to see it. Made me wonder if it's going to happen, and it made me wonder who's going to win, which is something good AEW does now. It's like, I would have bet Danielson was going to come out with the title, because I thought that maybe they just wanted to just totally flush the slate clean and try to wash their hands at everything that just happened. And I thought maybe he'd be a good direction to go in, but Moxie as a champ, like, I'm excited about too.
Yeah, no, I think he's been extraordinary. I think he is at a whole different level now. And I think he actually proved through his work that he is the guy. Kenny Omega just came back and got suspended because of what happened, but
he didn't set the world on fire when he came back. I mean, the ratings weren't in his favor when he came back, which
because also he came back as part of a 6-man tag of a trio. So he didn't have the spotlight fully to himself, and also the fact that you
problems might have began.
And then I understand the mentality of wanting to ease him back in. As opposed and not have him all of a sudden just giving 5-star matches and carrying the company.
And we also don't know the state of his body, because he does have a lot of, he's taken a lot of bumps. He played it up a little, but that's one thing too, is wrestling now, especially in AEW. We hear these guys aren't in the best shape, and sometimes they play it up on television. So the reality of it is, it's sort of like in hockey, where somebody's hurt, you don't really know exactly where, and you don't know exactly how bad, and they're working you.
And AEW especially is basically a company that just works hurt. Their style lends itself to the fact that everyone's just going to get hurt all the time because they go 100 miles an hour.
Sammy Guevara is lucky.
Yeah.
I saw him hit by a golf cart the other day. It's like, dude, just stay on your feet, man.
I honestly don't know how. Why am I blanking? Who's with Sting? Darby. I don't know how Darby walking, honestly. I've literally asked him this in person, like, how are you? Like, I sat next to him at Comic-Con, I was like, are you okay? Like, I was a therapist, like, are you all right? He's like, I'm fine, man.
I know. I hope, it's funny. The one thing I do hear in wrestling is sometimes the moves that you think hurt the most hurt the least. Sometimes the ones that you think hurt the least hurt the most. Because you hear that Hogan really messed himself up doing that leg drop all those years. So it's the repetitiveness of doing this really impacted his back and his spine and stuff like that. And it looks like it wouldn't even hurt to receive, let alone give. It's like... But so maybe Darby's like, but I saw some stuff last night that when he was going at it with it's like the thing with AEW is they try to make you believe that Orange Cassidy is really a threat to Pac, and that Brody King is really a threat. Darby Allin's really a threat to him. And in the moment, they do a good job of sort of selling you on that. It's in hindsight, you're like, well, Pac probably in a barroom ball, Orange Cassidy probably wouldn't have competed as well. But like that is one of the things I do love about AEW is that you mentioned the video game aspect of it. And I know some people that's what everything they hate about it. But like I like that feeling of like almost like when you play Street Fighter and you had these characters, and maybe they weren't the best characters in the game, but they're maybe the ones that were the most fun to play with. And it's
Right.
like you look at a guy like Danhausen and you're just like, well, this guy, he shouldn't be in the wrestling industry based on his size. And he's super weird, but he's also likable. And I was watching some clips of the Journey to Hookhausen the other day, and Tony Nese just kneeing him in the head. And I was like, I felt bad for the little dude. I was like, and Hook came out, and I was like, yeah, help him out, man. And it's like, he's just like delusion. I was trying to explain to someone the curse thing the other day, and I'm like, it's like this. He does something where he just interrupts somebody, and he curses them. And like, it works a lot of times because the person just didn't see it coming and they're caught off guard and something bad happens to him. So then Danhausen thinks he actually cursed them. And when I explain that to them, they're like, that's sort of brilliant. And it's like, this dude, he's like, the 5-star match things always bother me because I try to think it more. I think they should be going for a 5-star show because I think wrestling is more of a team effort. And I think you're not going to see a 5-star match out of Danhausen probably, but he could contribute to a 5-star show. And I think that's why it's important to have people like him that sort of separate. Not everybody looks the same. It's like when he stands next to your champion, there's an obvious difference. It makes your champion bigger, and it makes them. And I think having that stuff on the card is something that AEW is doing really well.
Yeah, and a character like Danhausen also, it lends itself to the entertainment aspect of it. AEW is very, very good at of presenting itself almost like sports. They have an interim champion when the champion gets hurt. They do a lot of very sports related things, and the company feels more authentic and grounded than say WWE's does. But I love it. But a character like Danhausen also kind of engages you in a whole different way. There's a whole different level of entertainment to pro wrestling that is just as satisfying. And as ridiculous as Danhausen is when he just jumps in the ring and curses you, comedy is a huge, huge part of wrestling, which I feel is probably the most underrated thing about wrestling. But one of the things I've always gravitated to as a wrestling fan, and my friends and I have talked about this for years and years of what we love and who the wrestlers we truly love are and why. And it's because they're funny assholes. At the end of the day, the funny asshole is the one. Yeah, The Rock is probably the greatest example.
Ric Flair.
Hilarious. Yeah, Ric Flair. The Undertaker had moments when he was a heel, when he was a Lord of Darkness.
Yep.
When
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Stone Cold was one of the greatest funny assholes. Triple H. Yeah.
Shawn Michaels.
Sure. Trish Stratus when she was a heel in 2004 was a great funny asshole.
There's so many of them.
Christian now today he's unbelievable.
That
Everybody
dude
talks about.
I will buy every face turn and buy every heel turn. I'm there for both of them with Christian. I think he's amazing.
And MJF is probably the ultimate right now of being a funny asshole. But I mean, he really just is. He comes off as a gigantic asshole, but he's very, very funny also when he wants to be. And I think to me, those are the most endearing wrestling characters. As much as we love Ricky Steamboat and respect him, and we think the world of him, the whole family man coming out with my wife and my kid riding a little horsey, like that's not what we watch wrestling for. We watch wrestling for the vicarious thrills of watching these people do and say the things we cannot say and do in real life.
Yes.
And we live vicariously through them. And in that alternate world that they live in, where you can get away with this shit.
It evolved over time too, because that Ricky Steamboat gimmick was that face gimmick was very similar to the heel gimmick they brought in with Kurt Angle, like a different version of it. But it's like, you're just like, it doesn't. People changed, and it's not. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the current AEW. So to finish up the story, so CM Punk wins the title over John Moxley at I think a great pay-per-view, a weekend full of great wrestling. I watched all the wrestling that weekend, all 3 shows. I love them all in different ways. And so then I was about to go to bed, and I'm like, they usually do press conferences. Maybe I'll turn it on. And I turned it on, and I don't know what time I got to bed that night because I was excited. I love CM Punk. I'm a big fan of his. Like I said before, I think he's done some stuff in this instance where he's sort of done stuff that affects people other than him, which I think that to me is it's stepping over a line. That's my own personal opinion. But the spectacle of it, I enjoyed it. I loved him cramming that cake in his mouth. And I remember listening to you or someone else. I'm like, no, like, I can't believe he had a fight after eating all that cake.
Yeah.
And
a bloody man.
Right, and clearly, it's been dissected. He came out and sort of talked about the Colt Cabana issue, where it was someone who a former friend of his wrestling in the industry. They had legal issues over the years. They're no longer friends, and Punk has chosen not to talk about it very often. They undisclosed. I think the terms of their lawsuit was undisclosed. Punk decided to talk about it a little bit, and he sort of threw some people under the bus. He sort of he threw the Young Bucks. He didn't say my name, but he criticized what was inferred to be the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and Hangman Page for some of their behavior backstage, and for
I believe he Hangman Page.
Oh, he did. Yes, he accused them of middling their top babyface, which is a term that I had to kind of figure out what it meant, but I think I kind of get it. And basically, he accused them of trying to sabotage and he is the man that has pushed that company to a higher level. And from a financial perspective, I'm sure he's their top merchandise seller. And I'm sure the Bucks probably don't love some of that. He sort of represents a different type of, and I can't speak for them, obviously, but so after he kind of threw him on the bus on the internet, he went backstage. And, depending on whose account you believe, the Bucks and Omega confronted him and other people involved, and a fight broke out, and they've all been suspended since. So anything about that you disagree with, or anything you think I missed?
No. I mean, that's the gist of the story. Yeah. And, and I believe Tony Khan was the CEO of AEW, was not aware of the fight breaking out during the press conference until he was told a little bit later on by Jericho. Because Jericho came out and he sat next to him and he talked a little bit. And I think when Jericho got up, Jericho was the one who clued him in. But then Tony sat back down, did 21 minutes of scrum before. And
Jericho did a great job in that interview, having known what was going on. Because the people before him, I don't think Swerve and Keith Lee did. I don't think there was someone else. I think it may have been Jade or someone.
It was Tony. It was Tony Storm.
Oh, Tony Storm. You're right.
Yeah. Who's not the best promo. They need to find. Yeah, I mean, she's a great wrestler, not the best promo, but she's learning. I mean, she's got charisma. She's got star power to her.
The women's division is a work in progress in AEW. I think Saraya is really going to help, but they have a lot of talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. As talented as their locker room is, and it really is an amazing locker room, they need more focus. WWE is light years ahead of them in terms of how they focus on their women. Not to say WWE is perfect by any means with the way they present their women. I mean, but you can't deny Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, and
all ready for television. All they're
and also all mega stars, all main eventers, all legit, as big as Roman Reigns is, as big
multiple. They have multiple dimensions. Bailey, another one. We're seeing
Bailey.
She's kicking ass right now.
Yes.
So
Ronda Rousey, of course.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing too. It's like the Logan Paul thing's pretty brilliant, especially because if you want to keep the belt on Roman until WrestleMania, he's not. Logan Paul's not going to win. It just helps them get through these months, and it's an interesting match, especially for.
But we're going to get a spectacle.
Yeah.
We're going to get a spectacle,
and Logan proved it work too. Yeah, he takes it seriously. I'd even take Bad Bunny versus Roman Reigns if they wanted to give me a month of that. I
mean, I don't really know much about Logan Paul, to be honest with you, but I mean that WrestleMania match he did with the Miz and against the Guerreros. Not the Guerreros, I'm sorry, the Mysterios was incredible. He was incredible in it. He was unbelievable. I mean, do you remember when Lawrence Taylor wrestled Bam Bam Bigelow in the main event of WrestleMania? And he was decent. He gave
better than Jay Leno.
Yeah, better than Jay Leno. Yeah. But these Bad Bunny and Logan Paul, these celebrities who come in now and actually somehow become pro wrestlers for a night, like a legit pro wrestlers for a night, is just unbelievable what they're able to do now.
So the Punk situation. So now that we're sort of in the mode where we put the belt on Moxley, we stripped the trios title off of the Bucks and Kenny Omega, and we're kind of waiting and seeing. There's an investigation going on backstage with what's happening with this, and we don't really know what's happening. Punk is also out for probably most of the next year, recovering from a tricep injury.
Right. Yeah. Which is actually an interesting dimension to what happened.
And I think that might be a blessing in disguise. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
No matter, because as it turns out, regardless of what happened at that press conference, no matter what, Punk was going to be stripped of the title because he just physically got hurt and he physically wasn't going to be able to defend it.
And there were signs of him putting his drink on the what we believe to be a tricep. So there was hinting that he was injured there because there was some speculation the injury might have happened in the fight. I believe we know what happened in the match, and he knew at that time.
I think it actually happened in the match. I think they even pinpointed it at some point when he did a dive outside of the ring or something.
It was a tope or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was early on in the match, so he worked the whole match hurt. So I'm sure that contributed to his mood. And And then there was speculation, of course, that he went into that scrum already with the agenda of addressing the Colt Cabana thing.
Seemed like it by the way the conversation started. That's definitely came across.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, he definitely began by picking out of one of the reporters and just going right after him.
He brought it's no. I don't think anybody else is going to bring up Colt Cabana.
Yeah, nobody brought it up.
Yeah, he was the one who brought it up, and he brought it up right away.
Right. So I mean, I can't speak to the hows and whys of why he did or what motivated him. But
it's an emotional moment too, coming out. His adrenaline is still going coming out of that match. Like he's put on a big show. He's been in pain, and he's hyped up. You know, he's in a state. It's different than the state that you and I woke up in today. You know.
Yeah, but it's also a remarkable moment that can only kind of happen in AEW. I mean, maybe now it could happen in WWE, but can you imagine? First of all, Vince McMahon would never ever have a press conference like that.
Right.
But certainly, nobody sitting next to Vince McMahon would ever all of a sudden just air out a bunch of grievances.
The closest ever WWE I can even compare it to was Miz and Daniel Bryan. That's the closest thing, and that's not even close. But it's that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, that was 2016 Talking Smack, back when there was a show right after SmackDown that did behind the scenes and promos of having the wrestlers, hosted by Renee Young and Daniel Bryan at the time, and Miz cut an incredible promo on Daniel Bryan.
Yep. Miz did it right. Yep.
Which you still remember. It was so raw.
I love Miz. Yep.
But yeah, like that's one of the profound differences with AEW is that you could not imagine anybody with Vince McMahon sitting there, just kind of shanghaiing literally the entire company in 20 minutes.
Love to see what Vince would have done.
Yeah. So,
not nodding the whole time that Tony was, which was interesting. But
yeah, that's the thing too. But yeah, I mean, it really did. It messed up the company in so many ways. I mean, AEW circled the wagons ever since that happened, and kind of really put a kibosh on leaks and put a kibosh on.
And they put on some good shows too. Without the talent, I think their television's been better than it was going in. I think I've enjoyed it more, and it's a little more focused.
And I mean, it's funny because Punk was I was so excited when Punk came back. Obviously, I loved his promos. I thought he was great for the company. I really did think he was great. But I just did not agree, based on what happened over the summer, that he should have been world champion. Coming out of All Out, I just felt like there should have been the same with how the Acclaimed, I felt, should have won the titles on that night. Like, everybody said they should have called an audible, and they were so over. You should have just put it on them there and just gone with the flow. I also feel like, Punk getting the title, even though they were in Chicago, it just wasn't the right move in terms of paying off the actual story that happened over the summer with Jon Moxley. And as it turns out, the whole thing kind of fell apart and ended up being put back on Jon Moxley anyway, because Punk somehow shot himself and the entire company in the foot, in his injured foot.
I also think, good point. I also think the Acclaimed was the right move, because at the time I thought they should have called that audible too. But the other thing, in hindsight, I look back and go, that was really a moment for Swerve and Keith Lee too, because they've been struggling to really get their footing, and they were massively over in that moment. And I think they've done they've done a decent job of giving Swerve and them more dimensions. They're setting him up for now their post-title, thing, because it's like they don't deserve to be shortchanged either. But the Acclaimed, I mean, then that's a homegrown. The Acclaimed is an act that was at like sort of that really low level, and they've grown to the top, and they're awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when something like that organically happens, you have to go with it.
Not
when
if
the crowd decides
over the years, but like.
Well, man has disagreed with that for the last 20 years. And when the crowd wants something, you give it to them.
Yes,
you don't fuck with them and deny it to them just because you can. But Swerve and Keith, as you point out, actually, I was just as impressed with Swerve and Keith in that match, and also this past weekend on Dynamite, as I was with the Acclaimed, just because of how well they handled their side of the match and how incredibly talented both those guys are. I mean, I knew how good they were both in NXT, but Swerve is so good in the ring. He's so smooth. He played such a good heel against the Acclaimed. Keith Lee Keith Lee is incredible. I mean, I don't think they've even tapped a fraction of what this guy can really do.
Yeah, no one has.
And I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you bring out everything Keith Lee actually can do. Because he really could be like the greatest thing in the company if you push him right.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think is gonna So thoughts of where you think that AEW can or should go from now, how they sort of deal with this mess they have on their hands and the parties involved and all the
I
facts.
mean, at some point the Bucks have to come back. I think Omega has to come back. Have to come back. I think they'll be welcomed with open arms. I think ultimately, as the story is being painted, and as history will kind of play this out. Punk is the disruptive influence that will be cut out of the company, or if he isn't already, and everything will kind of come back to normal. I think the right guy to hold this title for now is Moxley. I think he proved it. I know he's supposed to be on vacation, but
it's wrestling.
As it is, it's wrestling, he's the guy. But MJF is in the wings,
and he's hot, and it's like they don't want to make him. And the other thing too, they can get Wardlow is bubbling under the surface too if they wanted to get. They have stars, and they're kind of
they have so many stars.
Yeah.
And he's overflowing with incredible talent.
Yeah, the thing with the Punk situation is, I think if I had to bet, I think Tony's probably paying off. It probably is paying everybody and trying to just make sure there weren't any lawsuits. I think he probably wants to mitigate the chances of lawsuits. And with Punk, the injury is going to put him out for a while anyway. At least there'll be time to cool off and get to see where he's at. And maybe, because it's like, the other thing too is he's had 2 major injuries. He's had basically 2 major matches and 2 major injuries this year.
Yeah.
I'm sure others, matches that I'm forgetting, and multiple, but like, it's like his body may be telling him something at this point, and
right,
and his career might be winding down anyway. It's sad. It would be sad if this is the way that he goes out, unfortunately, but he clearly he did it to himself.
But also, it's a very CM Punk way to go out.
It is too. Yeah. Do you think there's any WWE? I mean, obviously now we can touch a little bit on the other big story this year is Vince McMahon no longer in charge, which is what brought me to be more interested again in WWE. That was a pretty wild story that you go on for a while, but
that was
right. And obviously
not unexpected, but
right. It's sort of one of those things, especially going back and watching some of these and hearing the comments he makes on some of these. You're like, oh yeah, that's always been Vince.
No, but Vince finally leaving the company is like the pro wrestling version of Queen Elizabeth dying. It's like all of a sudden, it's something
it's like what we've known all our lives.
Yeah, it's now over. This one constant in our lives has completely changed, and also decided the course of so much is now gone. I don't know if Punk is interested in WWE or WWE is interested in Punk. I mean, I've heard for years Punk and Triple H don't get along. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know.
It's like we also watched Cody Rhodes destroy a throne with a sledgehammer, and now it's like it's wrestling.
Right. Yeah.
But obviously, there are a lot of people in wrestling who don't like Bill Brooks. I mean, that they've made them
sure. But there is the idea is like, is Punk interested in one day going in the Hall of Fame? Is that something that one day he wants to, he wants to have that ring and stand in front of that, on that stage and join the Hall of Fame. That's probably like the best outlet for him at this point in WWE. I don't know if they're interested in him wrestling outside of maybe 1 or 2 spectacle matches,
It's weird to me how often wrestlers that have bad relationships with the company still hold the Hall of Fame in high regard. Because I remember even Bret Hart said years ago, like this is before the Hall of Fame meant anything. He's like, yeah, but I'd come back for the Hall. I'm like, really? Like, I could see Punk coming back, but it's a night to remember. It's a fake Hall of Fame, but it also but some of the dudes, like you take a guy like DDP. That dude deserves to be recognized. It's like he might not deserve that world title when he got it, but like now that he's doing all the great things he does for the industry, I'm glad that he can call himself a former world champion if that helps his marketing or anything. And he's a dude that deserves to be recognized. And I think that's good. And I think, Punk does too. It's just Punk's not a man who likes to eat humble pie, it seems. And it's like he's sort of it's like
he likes muffins.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. But like, I just like, that when you see that picture in WWE.com of him and Triple H finally just shaking hands and Punk smiling, it's like, I don't know. And the thing with Punk that I love is it's always a surprise. You never know. Because like, I didn't think he'd ever come back, but didn't think he'd actually wrestle to go in UFC. But like, I don't know. It seems more Punk not to do it. But
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where CM Punk goes from here. I don't know if he has a future in the business. If he has a future in AEW, if this was really his last run, and it kind of flamed out in the most spectacular fashion you could imagine.
Right. And I don't think this helps him. I don't think this is going to help him get more movie roles. I don't think it
No,
like
no. That's a thing. Yeah.
He comes off pretty poorly. It's
that's the other problem. When he left WWE in 2014, there was certainly a movement and a feeling and a groundswell that he didn't leave the right way and he deserved better. Whereas the AEW story is different. He was given everything, and including the world title. That very same night, he decided to kind of go into business for himself with that scrum. And so there's not the same feeling of like, oh man, he got screwed. If anything, it feels like he screwed himself.
It feels like there's a lot of people who can say "I told you so" about CM Punk.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, and WWE, I think to give them credit, a lot of times the guys that they sort of kind of turn their back on, whether they don't think they medically can wrestle or whatever, they are proven right a lot of the times. And Danielson, who I love, like I really hope that he stays in good health. Like,
me too.
Yeah, it's like it's like he probably should have wound down a few years ago, but it was him and Punk leaving that really got me out. Was the death nail for me to quit wrestling for 7 years. So them coming back is really what brought me back in. And I found tons of things that I love, but like I want them to be okay. So
yeah, me too. And the same also goes for Saraya when she if and when she wrestles. I hope she can. Yeah, and so Sting. Sting is a whole different thing. I don't know. Sting is incredible. He is the greatest man alive to me.
He's really writing his last chapter and doing something good for the business. He's doing something that a lot of other people either physically aren't able to do or emotionally don't want to do. But he's doing something great for the business. And the face paint helps.
Yeah. No, but the things he wants to do and he's still capable of doing.
Willing to do.
And I remember I asked Darby this at Comic-Con. It was like, and he was like, listen, everybody thinks I'm the negative influence on Sting. It's the opposite. Like Sting, I can't stop him from doing anything. He'll come up to me like, I'm going to jump off the balcony tonight. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Sting wants to do these things, and the fact that he still can and can wrestle at the level he does is really
he picks
incredible.
His spots really well too. What do you think we're going to see Jeff Hardy again soon? I'm hearing rumors that he might be coming back again soon. I'm a huge Jeff Hardy fan, but I want him to be okay, and I don't know.
Supposedly he's got one more. He's got one more run. He's got one more chance. If
his last one was his last chance.
Yeah. But I mean, the Hardys are. The Hardys will always have kind of like that mystique about them, even though the reality of Matt being as Matt's physical state, Jeff's physical and mental state, but somehow when you hear that music and they come out together, even if they're a fraction of what they were in 1999, 2000, there's still magic about them.
There is. And the fact they even got to have that music, which is awesome. I love the Hardys.
Yeah.
And I think in like the, I was talking to for the, I'm doing like this rap thing and I'm doing like a character, and a lot of it is influenced by stuff like Sting and the Hardys, where it's like you disappear behind something and it's just your creativity goes wild. It's I hope he's okay. I just so we probably should wrap up some too. I want to ask you a couple more just quick things. Do you remember before we wrap up, first times you met a wrestler in real life? Like outside of like maybe like at a show, like maybe in the real world?
Oh, that's a good question. Who's the first wrestler I met? Gosh.
You can think about it for a second. I'll tell you mine. I was at the airport in Providence, and I was at the bar early for a flight watching, I think, Regis and Kelly or something. And Spike Dudley was at the bar with me. And he was talking about, I think Busta Rhymes was on TV, and he was talking about how tall Busta Rhymes was because he was the same height as like The Rock when they were on Raw together. And I politely asked Spike Dudley to drop me off the bar. He politely declined. He gave me a limp fist handshake. And after he left, the bartender was explaining to other people how that guy was a pro wrestler. It was a sort of fun experience. He always didn't want to talk to me, but it was, I was the only other person in there, and he probably would have preferred the only other person not recognize him, but it was fun. So how about you?
It just occurred to me who it was, and it's actually a pretty big deal when you hear the name. But the first wrestler I believe I ever met was 1997. It was in New York. There was a WWF cruise around the Hudson River, right? And so they invited some fans to get on this boat, and hang out with some wrestlers and go around the Hudson, around the island, back and forth. And so who was there? It was the Headbangers. It was
Jazz and Mosh.
Sonny.
Oh,
Yeah,
Sonny.
it was
Sonny
Sonny,
Head.
and it was a guy who had just debuted, but then a few months prior, then got hurt, so he was on the shelf, and they kind of weren't doing anything with him, and he wasn't really important. And his name was Rocky Maivia.
That's where I thought you were going. I didn't know that, but I figured you were going there. That's awesome.
Yeah. So he was, he had just come off his big babyface run, and he was hurt for a while. I remember chatting with him.
A big babyface run is
yeah. Right. Where he was booed out of the building, die Rocky die,
wearing streamers. Yeah.
So, I remember.
Yeah.
No, I chatted with him a little bit, and I remember telling him that, you know what, you should probably come back as a heel. And he was like, that's something I'm very interested in doing. I remember he said something of that of that thing. It's like, I think you'd be really good at it. And he's like, I remember him agreeing. Like, he said something like, yeah, I think so too. And then lo and behold, that guy became The Rock.
Did he have that star quality to him? Did you feel like you were talking to someone who had a big future?
Yes and no. I mean,
he still had some bad hair back then.
Yeah, he did have the bad hair back then. But I remember he was wearing khaki shorts. He was wearing, like a button down short sleeve shirt. But he was very friendly, but he was nothing back then. He was just kind of and he was literally in a limbo.
Football player.
Yeah, he was in a limbo, and he was obviously thinking about what he could be and what could happen and what would need to happen for him to become what he could be. But at that time, early '97, who could have guessed?
It's funny you mentioned that too, because like I've been thinking, I've been really enjoying Hook's work on AEW, and when I look at him, I see a little bit of a Randy Orton situation, though I think he probably has a better attitude than Randy had, where like he came in, he had his father's Taz, and Randy Orton's father was Bob Orton Sr. and it's like they obviously understood the business, Bob Orton Jr. Yeah, they obviously understood the business from a very young age, and the way they're being presented is being very carefully, choreographed for the long term. And I look at Hook as someone to go, he could be somebody that could be a breakout star, that could, go outside of it if he can talk. I mean, we're going to find out, but he has some presence. Anybody you see that you think is going to be, special in?
The only thing holding Hook back is probably his size, but in AEW it doesn't matter as much,
right. And if he goes outside the industry to do other stuff, it doesn't matter as much either. Like he probably could. He believe him as an actor more than you believe Edge trying to fly the Money Plane. Which if you've not seen Money Plane starring Edge, please see it.
I have not seen Money Plane.
The bad guy is Frazier, and it's directed by one of the Lawrence brothers, and I won't spoil the rest, but you have to see it.
All right. I think Jungle Boy has a lot of potential. Yes. I think Jungle Boy has incredible mainstream appeal. I think he's a future main eventer waiting to happen. The guy's incredibly talented. The home Darby really is. I think Sammy Guevara to me is the total package. And I know everybody hates it. I love him and Ty.
Me too.
I love the whole act. I love it. It's the kind of thing that to me is the perfect example of living vicariously through a funny asshole.
Yeah.
Look
he
at
doesn't
him.
mind looking silly either, and I like that he doesn't mind looking silly, because if he took himself he calls him a Spanish god, but he's still kind of like is. He's
incredibly talented, but also like. Who isn't living vicariously through this guy? He's married to this beautiful woman. He's making out with her on TV every week. And he loves it that everybody boos him. He's everything. And the other guy who I think who's really impressed me in the last few weeks is Daniel Garcia.
Oh my God, I think yes.
Incredibly talented.
Yeah. I hope they make something out of all this storyline with him and Jericho. The storyline's been a little clunky, but I think they're going to end on the right place.
Yeah.
And he got a belt. He had some great matches. He beat Danielson. It's like that's.
Yeah, and he's only 23, so there's plenty of time with him.
Oh, I didn't realize he was that young. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very young.
He's a guy that I don't know where he was prior to here, but he's cutting the mold of a former ROH champion. Like he's sort of that sort of level of wrestler,
Yeah, and to be that good at 23, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, Yeah.
You know, he's wrestling world-class 5-star main event matches against Daniel Bryanson at 23 on TV.
Yeah, he has
and
basically
beating him.
Jericho and Danielson fighting over who gets to mentor him, which I know is kind of fictional, but I bet those guys are probably mentoring him both. I mean, the reality he's getting it from both of them, but on TV they're fighting over it, which is pretty amazing. You know?
It's a cool story. It's a cool story. But again, the guy is amazingly talented, and you know, I think you got 20 years with him for him to become like a mega star.
Yeah.
You know, once he develops a little bit more of the personality side of it.
Yeah, well, the business is in good hands. I mean, I think AEW has some struggles, and I think a lot of it might have to do with the high level of just Warner, what they're going through, because they're tied to the Warner Discovery, and like whatever. They've made a lot of crazy, I don't want to say crazy, they made a lot of controversial decisions with involved budget cuts this year. So that's one thing that kind of hangs over AEW. But with WWE and Triple H, they're talking about setting up NXTs around the world. It feels like the wrestling business is in better hands than it's been in years, which is
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But AEW, I mean, is responsible for really reigniting my enjoyment of pro wrestling in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
You know, I was barely a WWE fan in 2018, 2019. I still watch the shows, but I couldn't sit through an entire Raw. I couldn't sit.
They made it hard, especially 3 hours, a long time.
Yeah, but AEW is a fun show. I'm super into it. I care about what's happening. I love the talent. I come out of those shows excited and invigorated, and you know, and just like,
the energy is really,
and that's really, what can you ask for?
No, you can't. All I can ask for is that they keep it going, and that they keep the magic and the lightning in the bottle. You know, it's like it's exciting. It's a great time to be a fan. It's really the fan atmosphere of AEW is I'm not a big person for going to things in person. I sort of like don't like the crowds. I don't like opening acts. I don't like all that stuff. But like AEW, I'm excited to go see. I think it's
well, they're in Boston in November, right? November 8th.
I think I'm actually closer to Albany now. And so I almost thought about going to that show, but like,
you should have.
Yeah, it's but I'm
still. I can tell you, I've been to 2 or 3.
Yeah,
I've been to 2 or 3. Those shows are really worth watching. They are fun to be at live. Again, you don't feel like you're a potted plant sitting in a chair, just watching a TV show happen around you. You're watching a wrestling experience that you're actually actively part of.
Right now, I'm watching Hulk Hogan choke Bobby Heenan in the background. And it's like, a lot of people complain with the length of AEW shows. I actually appreciate getting my money's worth. I mean, if I was there for 8 hours at Arthur Ashe Stadium, I mean, I could probably sit there watching tennis for 8 hours. I love tennis too, but like that's a long time to sit there. But I do appreciate getting your money's worth, and like I have to sort of work my schedule around AEW pay-per-views because I haven't made the last hour of Raw in a long time. I am enjoying the product, but it's like I have to watch this tomorrow. It's not keeping me. But with AEW, it's like I stayed up and watched the Scrum last time. So
I only watch Raw and SmackDown on YouTube. I can't watch the shows. At some point, I think, you know, when Triple H has really gotten more of a control over the product, I probably will give it a shot. But 3 hours is just too much to ask now for me on and
Monday I think most people who work for the company will prefer it to be 2 hours. It's a big financial win for the company, and you understand why they do. The thing I don't like about it is that unfortunately this is what they have to do. They're saving the best match at the end, and it's like I'm worn out by then, you know. And but I'll watch it the next day, because I missed the cage thing with Loomis and Miz, and I'm like I didn't even go back to watch it because I'm like, well, I missed the moment, so I already saw the meme. It's like, you know. But hey, it's too much wrestling is not a bad thing to complain about. So
no, and as you said, the wrestling business is healthier now than it's been in years. It's more interesting and exciting than it's been in years. There's something for everybody, I think.
Yes.
If you really want to, you know, there's somebody or something that you can latch onto, and the shows are just enjoyable again. It's just great to watch wrestling.
I think the part of that is the women's wrestling has come along so much since in the time that I stopped watching it. I think that's brought a lot of new fans in too, because they treat women's wrestling very seriously now in both companies. I think that's a great thing. For me, actually, women's wrestling, the women's revolution, as they dubbed it back in 2015, really is the biggest change and the biggest progressive move the business has seen in the last 20 years. I love Sasha Banks. I love her to death. Yeah. I think she is the most talented performer, I think, in both companies when she's given the platform to actually be what she can be. I think she's fantastic. But I love women's wrestling in general. I love Britt Baker's matches. I love I think Toni Storm's great. I love Bianca Belair. I love
Ronda, I thought Ronda Rousey was a fantastic addition,
Yeah.
who somehow naturally became very organically part of WWE in such a short amount of time. I think she gets it for the most part. Well, not for the most part. She gets it. Period.
Yeah.
So
Liv Morgan,
yeah,
Alexa Bliss. I mean, this
Alexa Bliss has always been great.
She's one of the top merchandise sellers over there at WWE. I think she's like usually like in the top 5. I mean,
she's very underutilized the last 3 years.
Right, and despite that, it's like I couldn't figure out how that happened. I mean, but like, yeah, she's great.
I think she got hurt, and then she spent some time away, and then just things kind of moved on without her.
In the Bray Wyatt thing, there was a lot of weird stuff about the way he left, and that probably impacted her a little bit too. But
right. But if she ever went back to her original gimmick, like what she had in 2017, 2018, that goddess gimmick, she should be on top again, because she can still go. And one of the best people they have on the mic, male or female. When you give her a microphone and let her talk, she's great.
Yeah, and that's one thing AEW do is they let their personality shine, and I think that's what helps them get over. It's it just seems like it's funny. It's like people talk that they're not competition with WWE. They are competition with WWE. I do find that people do watch one product but not the other, and I do find there's even a personality difference between the people who watch one versus the other. So there is some merit to the fact that they are not really competition, even though they're competing for all the same sponsors and all the same wrestlers and all of that stuff. But it's the individuals kind of pick a lane a lot of times. So
yeah,
cool, man.
I would agree with that.
All right, we've gone almost 2 hours, so I got to make sure this file doesn't get corrupt. It's been a blast, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I really probably couldn't.